The sun had barely risen over the banks of the Nile, its golden light spilling over the ancient city like a slow, deliberate reveal. Sand, dust, and the faint scent of papyrus mingled in the early morning air, as if the earth itself were whispering stories long forgotten. From a distance, the city seemed ordinary, merchants opening stalls, children running barefoot through narrow streets, and the distant murmur of priests chanting in temples. But beneath this ordinary morning lay secrets that no traveler could guess, secrets of power, ambition, and hidden labor that shaped the destiny of a queen whose name would echo across millennia. Cleopatra. Historians have long painted her as a figure of glamour and political genius, a queen whose every decision seemed designed to captivate both allies and enemies. But what often goes unspoken, buried beneath layers of legend, are the quiet, invisible hands that allowed her empire to flourish, the artisans, the craftsmen, and the laborers who toiled in shadows, far from the opulent halls of the palace. Among these hidden networks, a mysterious and forbidden operation existed, one that blurred the lines between artistry, devotion, and danger. It was a factory unlike any other, devoted to crafting garments that spoke louder than words, garments made from the hides of lions, stitched and decorated with precision, intended to display power, dominance, and an almost ritualistic reverence for life and death. Walking through the narrow alleyways of this ancient city, one might stumble upon fragments of this past, a cracked mural showing a figure draped in feline skins, a discarded tool engraved with symbols whose meanings have been lost to time, or the faint, almost imperceptible footprints of those who moved in fear and secrecy. These remnants are whispers, threads of evidence that suggest something extraordinary once existed behind closed doors, hidden from prying eyes and chroniclers alike. The story of the lion-skin garments is not just about luxury, it is about survival, loyalty, and the invisible hierarchies that dictated who would thrive and who would vanish into obscurity. Imagine, for a moment, the fear and awe that must have accompanied the artisan's work. Each cut of the hide, each careful stitch, was performed under the weight of expectation and the silent threat of punishment. To craft a garment for Cleopatra was to participate in an intimate ritual of power, one where a single mistake could be fatal. And yet, the artisans pressed on, driven by loyalty, ambition, or perhaps desperation, their identities hidden behind veils of secrecy that time has only partially lifted. Their voices are gone, but their labor remains, an echo carved into the very fabric of history, waiting for those who dare to uncover it. Even the most detailed records cannot fully capture the tension that must have pervaded these hidden halls. Fragmented scrolls and scattered inscriptions hint at a world of strict hierarchies and whispered threats, of rivalries that flared in the shadow of the queen's attention, and of laborers whose devotion was as much a survival tactic as a reflection of reverence. Outside, the city thrived with commerce and spectacle, but inside these clandestine walls, the rhythm of work was punctuated by fear, secrecy, and an almost sacred precision. Here, in these corridors of leather, cloth, and shadow, history was being stitched together, piece by painstaking piece, into a story that few were meant to witness. And yet, the story lingers. In the wind that sweeps across deserted courtyards, in the dust-filled corners of ruins long abandoned, in the faint outlines of murals and tools, there are hints of something extraordinary. There is a sense that the past is not silent, it is watching, waiting, urging us to look closer, to piece together the fragments left behind. Cleopatra's hidden empire of lion-skin garments may have been cloaked in secrecy, but its imprint on history is indelible. The question that haunts archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike is simple and unsettling: why would a queen go to such lengths to hide something so potent, so emblematic of her power? And what truths might still be buried, waiting for those bold enough to uncover them? The Nile flows quietly past, indifferent to the passage of time, as the city awakens around its banks. Yet somewhere in its shadows, beneath the ordinary hum of life, the echoes of hidden factories, of silent artisans, and of a queen's carefully guarded ambitions continue to stir. The story is ready to be told, and as we step closer to these ancient secrets, one thing becomes clear: this is a tale of power, fear, and human ingenuity, and it begins not in the palace, but in the shadows of those who built Cleopatra's empire from the ground up. Cleopatra's world was one of dazzling contrasts. On the streets of Alexandria, the scent of exotic spices mingled with the tang of the harbor, merchants shouted over the chatter of traders from distant lands, and the marble facades of palaces gleamed under the relentless Egyptian sun. To an outsider, it was a city of splendor and sophistication, a jewel of the ancient world. But beneath this glittering veneer lay a network of secrets and machinations that few could ever glimpse, let alone survive. Cleopatra, the Queen of the Nile, was not just a ruler, she was a strategist who understood the subtle power of symbols, influence, and fear. Every decree, every luxurious garment, every carefully orchestrated display of wealth was a chess move in a game that could cost lives as easily as it could win loyalty. Her influence extended far beyond the opulent palaces and the halls of the Senate. Cleopatra's shadow empire was vast and meticulously managed, a delicate balance of politics, commerce, and artistry. Among her most closely guarded ventures was the production of lion-skin garments, a luxury so rare and so laden with symbolic weight that it became a measure of power in itself. These garments were not mere clothing, they were instruments of prestige, designed to impress, intimidate, and assert dominance over allies and adversaries alike. Those who wore them were seen as extensions of the queen's authority, while those who crafted them operated in near-complete secrecy, hidden from the public eye and subjected to the unforgiving standards of royal expectation. To understand Cleopatra's hold over this clandestine operation, one must see her not just as a monarch, but as a master orchestrator of human ambition. She understood the value of loyalty, but also of fear. She rewarded brilliance, ingenuity, and discretion, but she was ruthless when betrayal threatened her control. Among the artisans and foremen who worked in the shadows of her empire, stories persisted of whispered warnings, abrupt disappearances, and punishments that were as swift as they were terrifying. These were people who balanced on the knife edge between survival and doom, and yet, the allure of prestige, the chance to serve the queen directly, drew them into her orbit. Every stitch, every carefully cut hide, was a negotiation between devotion and self-preservation. Cleopatra's court was not merely a collection of advisors and servants, it was a theater of constant observation, a web of alliances and rivalries as intricate as the patterns sewn into her lion-skin garments. Diplomats, generals, and merchants all played roles in a complex political dance, but the artisans held a peculiar position. Though they were invisible to the masses, their work was essential. One misstep, one imperfection in a garment, could provoke the queen's wrath or, worse, the ire of her trusted overseers. This delicate balance created tension that permeated every corner of the workshop, every night spent in preparation for the ceremonial displays that would cement Cleopatra's image as both divine and untouchable. The lion-skin garments themselves were a mystery wrapped in secrecy. Their origins, their construction, and their purpose were closely guarded knowledge. Some were destined for rituals, others for public display, but all carried with them the weight of symbolism, strength, courage, and dominion over life and death. To wear such a garment was to step into the aura of Cleopatra herself, to become part of her narrative and, perhaps, her control. For the queen, these garments were not only a display of opulence, they were tools, messaging devices woven from hides and decorated with precision, whispering of her power even in her absence. Yet, despite her careful orchestration, cracks began to show. Fragmented scrolls and accounts from contemporaries hint at tensions within the production network, rivalries that threaten to disrupt the delicate order. Foremen and master artisans, though loyal in appearance, often competed for favor, their ambitions shadowed by fear of punishment. Rumors of sabotage, theft, and secret alliances circulated quietly, never reaching the public eye but shaping the very fabric of the operation. Cleopatra, aware of such undercurrents, maintained a calculated distance, rewarding efficiency while ensuring no one could gain too much independent power. It was a high-stakes game, and the smallest miscalculation could have devastating consequences. Through the lens of history, we see Cleopatra as an icon of beauty, intellect, and political acumen, yet her genius was inseparable from the networks she controlled, the artisans she commanded, and the risks she imposed upon those who served her. The hidden factory of lion-skin garments was a microcosm of her reign, a world where creativity, loyalty, and fear intersected in ways that left permanent marks on those who survived it. Each individual within this shadow network became a character in a larger story, their lives entwined with the ambitions of a queen whose reach extended far beyond what anyone could see. And so, as night fell over Alexandria, casting long shadows over the cobbled streets and marble columns, the city seemed to hold its breath. Cleopatra's empire pulsed with life above and below, a delicate balance of public grandeur and secret labor, of loyalty rewarded and missteps punished. The hidden factory waited quietly in the wings, its walls harboring stories of dedication, danger, and human resilience. Little did the world know, these walls would witness more than craftsmanship, they would witness the quiet tensions that could topple empires and leave secrets buried for centuries. The question remained, whispered only in the margins of history, what truly happened behind those hidden walls? And who among the artisans survived to carry the memory of their queen's shadow empire into the future? The desert stretched endlessly beyond Alexandria, an ocean of golden sand that shimmered under the relentless sun. From a distance, the ruins of old settlements appeared like mirages, half buried in dunes, whispers of lives long extinguished. It was a landscape that demanded respect, beautiful, unforgiving, and indifferent to human ambition. Yet somewhere within these shifting sands lay a secret that had been buried for nearly 2 millennia, Cleopatra's hidden lion-skin garment factory. Scholars and treasure hunters alike had speculated about its existence, but no one had yet uncovered its precise location. And so the search began, a slow, deliberate pursuit of fragments, hints, and the faintest echoes of an empire's private ambitions. Archaeologists walked carefully over the dunes, trowels in hand, eyes scanning for anomalies in the sand, in the shadows cast by jagged rocks, in the faint outlines of walls that had resisted the passage of centuries. Every fragment of pottery, every piece of burned wood, every shard of faded inscription was a potential clue, a breadcrumb left by time itself. The excitement in the air was palpable, tempered only by the knowledge that countless explorers before them had come seeking the same prize, only to leave frustrated or defeated. Yet there was something different here, something that suggested these ruins might finally tell a story long buried, the story of the artisans, the foremen, and the secret hands that created garments worthy of a queen. Among the key figures who emerged from historical reconstruction was a nameless foreman, a man whose life became entwined with Cleopatra's shadow empire. Records suggest he was meticulous, a perfectionist who demanded the highest standards from his artisans. He had been entrusted with a responsibility few could comprehend, overseeing the creation of garments made from the skins of lions, each one a symbol of dominion and divine authority. He moved through the factory with quiet authority, a figure both respected and feared, balancing the demands of the queen with the volatility of his workforce. His name may have been lost to time, but his presence, his decisions, and the weight of his authority linger in the ruins and fragments left behind. Life inside the factory was a careful choreography of labor, observation, and quiet threats. Artisans worked in near silence, aware that even the smallest mistake could spell disaster. The foreman's eyes were everywhere, scanning, judging, measuring. It was a place where loyalty was currency and survival demanded constant vigilance. Some workers whispered about rituals that accompanied the preparation of each garment, the ceremonial ways in which hides were cured, cut, and stitched, each step performed with reverence. Others spoke in hushed tones of disappearances, colleagues who had vanished without explanation, leaving only a tool, a piece of cloth, or a hastily scrawled note as a mark of their existence. Fear was a constant companion, threading through the factory like an invisible, watchful ghost. As the archaeological team sifted through the ruins, they began to uncover traces that seemed to echo these ancient tensions. Burned fragments of wood hinted at a workshop once filled with smoke and fire, tools lay scattered as if abandoned in haste, and faint outlines of walls suggested a complex network of rooms, spaces for preparation, assembly, and storage. Every artifact became a piece of the puzzle, each layer of dust a silent witness to the lives that had been spent here. The foreman's office, reconstructed from fragments of inscriptions and floor plans, suggested a place of command, where decisions were made that could determine the fates of artisans and the trajectory of Cleopatra's private ambitions. It was here, among broken pottery and faded markings, that the human story began to emerge from the ruins. The search for the factory was not just an excavation of stone and sand, it was an excavation of human experience. Letters scratched on pottery shards, notes hidden in the folds of discarded textiles, and symbols etched into walls told stories of fear, courage, and quiet defiance. The artisans were more than laborers, they were participants in a dangerous game, their skills coveted, their loyalty tested, their every action weighed against the expectations of a queen who ruled with both brilliance and ruthlessness. Through these fragments, the past spoke, of long nights spent stitching, of whispered conversations behind closed doors, of the constant tension between ambition and survival. Suspense built as teams uncovered signs of sabotage. Some hides had been slashed, tools broken deliberately, and cryptic symbols painted hastily in hidden corners. Were these acts of rebellion, accidents, or warnings left by someone who had known too much? The ruins themselves seemed to hold their breath, as if concealing secrets that only time could reveal. The foreman, reconstructed through historical accounts, emerges here not just as a manager of labor, but as a guardian of secrets, a man balancing the demands of loyalty, efficiency, and survival in a world where a single misstep could unravel everything. His decisions, recorded in traces and inscriptions, shaped the factory's fate, and perhaps even the course of Cleopatra's hidden empire. The tension of discovery was mirrored in the desert itself. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dunes, the ruins took on an almost spectral quality. Every shift in the wind stirred the sand, revealing shapes, concealing others, playing tricks on the eye. The search became a psychological as well as a physical endeavor. The archaeologists were not just uncovering stone and wood, they were piecing together the rhythm of life in a hidden world, one heartbeat at a time. Each uncovered artifact raised more questions than answers, deepening the mystery and keeping the past tantalizingly out of reach. By the time the team uncovered a fragment of a mural depicting a figure draped in lion skins, the story of the factory began to coalesce. It was a moment of revelation and tension, a glimpse into a world that had survived only in whispers and shadows. The foreman's careful orchestration, the artisan's quiet toil, the risks they all took, it became tangible in the sand-swept fragments, a story half-told yet brimming with implications. It was a story of secrecy, skill, and survival, waiting to be fully understood. And as the sun set behind the dunes, the desert seemed to murmur the same question that had haunted explorers for centuries: who among them survived, and what truths did they carry into a world that had long forgotten their names? The lion-skin garments were more than mere fabric, they were living symbols, heavy with power, ambition, and the shadow of mortality. Each piece told a story of kings and queens, of hunters and artisans, of life taken and transformed into an emblem of dominance. Cleopatra's court had long understood the psychological weight of such attire. To drape oneself in the golden-brown hide of a lion was to claim a fragment of the animal's fearsome presence, to borrow its courage, its strength, its aura of unchallengeable authority. Yet, as rare and revered as these garments were, their very creation demanded secrecy and precision, an intricate dance between artistry and fear, devotion and danger. The construction of a single garment was a marvel of skill. Hides had to be selected carefully, each one inspected for imperfections. Ancient tanning methods ensured the skins would last without losing their luster, while dyes extracted from crushed minerals and plants added subtle, symbolic hues. Artisans worked with tools that have long since vanished, carving, stitching, and shaping with meticulous care. Every seam, every lining, every fastening was executed under the watchful eye of a foreman whose standards were exacting and whose punishments for failure were severe. One miscalculation could ruin the garment, or worse, draw the queen's ire upon the artisan who dared to err. The stakes were not abstract, they were real, tangible, and potentially lethal. Symbolism was woven into every corner of the design. Lions were creatures of the wild, their power feared and admired in equal measure. By wearing their skins, Cleopatra's court sought not only to intimidate political rivals but also to assert dominance over nature itself, a subtle reminder that the queen's power extended beyond her human domain. In ceremonial parades, these garments spoke a silent language of authority. Those adorned in them became living icons, walking proof of Cleopatra's ability to bend the world, and its symbols, to her will. The garments were performance, propaganda, and ritual intertwined, and the artisans who made them understood the gravity of their task in ways that transcended the technical. Yet for all their splendor, there was a darker undercurrent. Surviving garments, discovered centuries later, bear marks that suggest more than artistic intent. Small cuts, faint stains, and hidden symbols hint at rituals that are only partially understood today. Were these marks ceremonial, meant to bless the garment with strength? Or were they warnings, reminders of the risks taken by those who made and wore them? Scholars have debated these questions, poring over fragments and ancient texts, yet the answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Each discovery seems to raise more questions than it answers, deepening the mystery of Cleopatra's hidden ambitions and the secretive network that brought them to life. The scarcity of lion-skin garments made them objects of desire and obsession. Only a select few were ever created, each assigned a specific purpose. Some were for military generals demonstrating loyalty, others for religious ceremonies in temples dedicated to gods whose favor was essential to the queen, and still others for Cleopatra herself, worn only in the most private, politically charged moments. To touch, to see, to even be near such a garment was to brush against power itself. And yet, their very rarity made them targets. Historical fragments suggest that some garments were stolen, smuggled, or hidden, disappearing under circumstances that remain unexplained. The pursuit of these garments was not simply a matter of fashion, it was a struggle for influence, survival, and access to the queen's inner circle. For the artisans, the creation of these garments was both a sacred duty and a source of constant fear. Every day, they worked with materials that symbolized life and death, creating something that was not merely clothing but a vessel of authority and intimidation. Mistakes could lead to disgrace, or worse, punishment. Yet there was also pride in their work, the knowledge that their hands were shaping objects that would be admired, feared, and remembered long after their own lives ended. The tension between fear and pride infused every stitch, every cut, every detail, creating a silent narrative of human ambition and vulnerability. As the archaeological record has slowly revealed, the garments themselves may hold secrets beyond their intended symbolism. Some surviving pieces contain coded patterns, enigmatic markings, or hidden symbols that suggest messages meant only for certain eyes. Were these clues to a hidden network within Cleopatra's court, a secret lineage of artisans, or warnings of betrayal? Or were they simply decorative flourishes, misunderstood by centuries of scholars? The ambiguity itself fuels fascination, inviting historians, archaeologists, and storytellers to reconstruct not just the garments but the lives and power structures intertwined with them. The lion-skin garments thus become a lens through which to view the ancient world, a window into Cleopatra's genius, ambition, and ruthlessness. The artisans of Cleopatra's hidden lion-skin garment factory lived in a world that few outside the palace walls could ever imagine. To the citizens of Alexandria, they were invisible, ordinary laborers in a bustling metropolis. Yet behind the walls of the factory, their lives were dictated by fear, skill, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Each day began before sunrise, as the first pale light of dawn crept across the Nile, glinting off tools laid carefully in preparation for the day's labor. The air was thick with the scent of cured hides, crushed minerals, and sweat. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the occasional clatter of a tool or a hushed instruction from a foreman. Every movement carried weight, every glance could signal approval or suspicion. Work was grueling, both physically and psychologically. The hides of lions were heavy and unyielding, requiring strength and finesse to cut and shape without blemishing. Artisans needed steady hands and sharp eyes, for a single imperfection could undo days of labor and, in the most extreme cases, endanger the worker. Mistakes were rarely tolerated. Yet despite the fear, pride infused their work. Each stitch, each seam, each carefully aligned pattern was a testament to human skill and resilience. They were creating objects that would carry the queen's authority, garments that transcended fashion to become symbols of power, intimidation, and ritual significance. But the artisans were more than craftsmen, they were human beings, each with dreams, fears, and ambitions of their own. Some worked to provide for families, others to secure a position of influence within the intricate hierarchies of the court. Friendships formed cautiously, alliances even more carefully. Rumors spread in whispers, a survival tactic as much as idle gossip, whispers of punishments meted out for minor mistakes, of colleagues who had disappeared without explanation, of the unpredictable favor of the queen herself. These stories became cautionary tales, shaping behavior and loyalty with subtle, constant pressure. Each worker learned to navigate the delicate balance between obedience and self-preservation, mastery and invisibility. In moments of rare respite, the artisans' humanity shone through. Huddled in shaded corners, they shared stories of home, of children they had left behind, of siblings and parents whose lives seemed distant and fragile in comparison to the intensity of their work. Some etched messages into the walls of their workspace, faint graffiti that recorded their thoughts, frustrations, and even fleeting joys. These inscriptions, discovered centuries later, provide a rare glimpse into their inner lives, the quiet defiance and resilience of those who labored in the shadows of power. In them, one can almost hear the heartbeat of a long-lost community, pulsing quietly beneath the grandeur of the queen's ambitions. Yet the shadow of danger never fully lifted. Rivalries among artisans simmered beneath the surface, as each sought the favor of the foreman or a rare glimpse of the queen herself. Trust was fragile, alliances were temporary, and the specter of betrayal loomed constantly. The foreman, whose presence commanded both respect and fear, could elevate or ruin careers with a single word or gesture. Some artisans attempted subtle acts of sabotage or clever maneuvers to secure a better position, aware that the stakes were not just personal pride but survival. The tension was omnipresent, a silent pulse that threaded through every stitch and cut of the lion hides. The factory itself mirrored this precarious existence. Dark, narrow corridors connected vast workrooms filled with tools, hides, and half-completed garments. The walls, scorched in places by ancient fires used in tanning processes, bore faint inscriptions and symbols that hinted at rituals or secret instructions. Rooms were arranged to maximize efficiency, but also to maintain control, a labyrinthine layout that ensured workers were constantly aware of observation, from foremen, from each other, and from the invisible eyes of the queen herself. The factory was more than a workspace, it was a theater of discipline, loyalty, and tension, every element designed to produce not just garments, but obedience. Amid this structured chaos, certain individuals emerged as leaders among the artisans. They were skilled, respected, and cunning, navigating both the physical demands of their craft and the intricate social hierarchies of the factory. These artisans became informal mentors, teaching apprentices the secrets of working with lion hides, sharing techniques honed over years, and subtly guiding newcomers through the perils of courtly labor. Yet even these leaders were not immune to fear, each decision carried potential consequences, and each moment of perceived weakness could invite scrutiny or suspicion. Life in the factory demanded constant vigilance, mental as well as physical, and the burden of knowledge weighed heavily on those at the top. Despite these hardships, a sense of camaraderie endured in small, fragile forms. Artisans shared food, offered encouragement during long hours, and, in rare moments of levity, created small works of art unrelated to the lion-skin garments. These acts were private, intimate gestures of humanity, a reminder that even in a place governed by fear and hierarchy, creativity and connection could survive. Yet these moments were fleeting, always shadowed by the ever-present awareness that one misstep could change everything, that a single misjudged glance or careless word could spell the end of a career, or a life. Over time, patterns emerged, and historians today can trace the rhythms of daily life within the factory. Early mornings of preparation, midday bursts of intense activity, evenings spent inspecting, finishing, and securing garments for the queen. The cycle was relentless, unbroken, and absolute in its demands. It is within this rhythm that the artisan's story comes alive, a story of courage and resilience in the face of pressure, of human ambition tested by power, and of lives entwined with a queen whose presence was as invisible as it was omnipresent. Yet even with this understanding, questions remain. How many artisans survived the hidden world of Cleopatra's factory? How many carried the memory of their work in silence, burdened by knowledge that could never be shared? And how did the secret of the lion-skin garments endure through the centuries, whispered only in fragments, rumors, and the faint echoes of artifacts? These questions hang over the ruins, over the artifacts, and over the story itself, creating a tension that lingers like the faint scent of tanned hides in the air, a haunting reminder of lives once lived in shadows, crafting symbols of a queen's power while navigating a perilous, invisible hierarchy of fear, loyalty, and ambition. The artisans were more than laborers. They were the lifeblood of Cleopatra's hidden empire, the silent architects of power, and the unsung participants in a drama that played out far from the marble halls of the palace. In their labor, one sees not only skill but courage, not only fear but resilience, not only obedience but a quiet assertion of humanity. And as the sun set over Alexandria, spilling its final light across the Nile, the factory stood silent, yet alive with memory, a testament to those who toiled, survived, and shaped a queen's legend in the shadows, leaving clues for those willing to follow their story centuries later. Cleopatra's court was a labyrinth of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal, a place where every smile could conceal a dagger and every compliment could mask calculated manipulation. The hidden lion-skin garment factory, though physically removed from the glittering halls of the palace, was inextricably tied to this web of intrigue. The artisans and foremen were aware of the stakes, but even they could not fully comprehend the political games unfolding just beyond the factory walls. Rival factions vied for the queen's attention, seeking influence over the lucrative production of garments, while spies and informants moved silently through corridors, recording alliances, quarrels, and secrets. Every stitch, every completed garment, became a currency in this complex exchange of power, a tangible expression of ambition that could be leveraged, stolen, or weaponized. Among the court's most cunning players were the diplomats and advisors who understood that Cleopatra's favor could determine the fate of entire families, cities, and even nations. These men and women watched the factory with interest, recognizing that the artisan's work was more than craft, it was leverage. A single stolen garment, a delayed shipment, or a subtle flaw could be used as evidence of incompetence, betrayal, or disloyalty. The queen's inner circle was populated by individuals willing to manipulate the production network to secure their own advantage, turning artisans into pawns in a high-stakes game they barely understood. Suspicion was constant, alliances fragile, and every success in the factory was shadowed by the potential for sabotage. Within the factory, the foreman became not only a manager of labor but a guardian of secrets, a sentinel standing between the queen and the unpredictable ambitions of those around her. He had to navigate the treacherous currents of court intrigue, interpreting coded messages, assessing loyalty, and anticipating threats that could emerge from anywhere. Some artisans aligned themselves subtly with powerful figures outside the factory, using their skill as leverage to curry favor or protect themselves from potential danger. Others engaged in covert sabotage, motivated by resentment, ambition, or fear of the unpredictable whims of those in power. In this environment, trust was fleeting, and every decision carried weighty consequences. Rumors of betrayal were never idle. Whispers circulated that certain foremen or master artisans had been secretly communicating with rival factions, providing information about production schedules, material shortages, or even defects in garments. These subtle acts of disloyalty were difficult to detect but could be devastating if discovered, leading to punishment, exile, or worse. The mere hint of disloyalty could unsettle the entire workforce, spreading fear like a virus and forcing even the most skilled artisans to second-guess their every move. The tension in the factory was thus both internal and external, a constant interplay between the immediate demands of production and the invisible threats of political manipulation. Cleopatra herself remained an enigmatic presence, rarely appearing directly in the factory but omnipresent through her influence. The artisans and foremen understood that their work was a reflection of her will, and that the queen's judgment could be both merciless and absolute. Her advisors, equally shrewd, recognized the potential of the factory's output to reinforce or undermine her authority. Rivalries among courtiers often centered on access to these symbols of power, and disputes could escalate quickly, sometimes violently, as individuals sought to control the narrative and leverage the artisan's labor for political gain. The factory, in essence, became an extension of the court, a microcosm where loyalty, fear, and ambition intersected with every cut of hide and every carefully sewn stitch. Amid these dynamics, subtle acts of espionage occurred. Messages encoded in the patterns of garments, notes hidden in tools, or whispers passed between artisans became a covert language through which allegiances were signaled and instructions conveyed. The artisans, often unaware of the larger political significance of their actions, found themselves entwined in conspiracies that could determine life or death. The foreman, aware of the undercurrents, had to balance vigilance with subtlety, ensuring that the production continued without disruption while monitoring potential betrayals that could unravel months of meticulous work. One miscalculation could set off a chain reaction, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of the factory. These pressures created an atmosphere thick with tension and unease. The artisans worked in near silence, aware that every action was being scrutinized, not just for quality but for loyalty. Friendships were cautious, alliances tentative, and conversations measured. The faintest hint of discontent, a slight delay, or a misplaced comment could draw suspicion and invite scrutiny. The weight of the court's expectations bore down on the factory, transforming it into a place where human ambition collided with divine authority, where the ordinary act of crafting a garment became a perilous endeavor fraught with unseen dangers. The impact of betrayal extended beyond the artisans themselves. Families of workers could be drawn into the consequences of a misstep, and rumors of punishment for relatives served to reinforce obedience and caution. The factory was thus a crucible, where personal ambition, professional skill, and political survival were tested daily. It was within this crucible that some artisans thrived, leveraging their abilities to secure protection or favor, while others faltered, becoming casualties of ambition and circumstance. The line between success and ruin was perilously thin, and navigating it required both intelligence and an almost instinctual understanding of human behavior. Historical fragments suggest that certain acts of betrayal were orchestrated with remarkable subtlety. Deliberate flaws in garments, misplaced tools, or delayed shipments could be interpreted as mistakes or accidents while serving the political objectives of those in power. These subtle manipulations added layers of complexity to the production process and heightened the constant tension in the factory. Even the most loyal and skilled artisans could find themselves unwitting participants in intrigue, their labor exploited in ways they could neither foresee nor control. The foreman's role was crucial in detecting and mitigating these risks, acting as both manager and mediator in a world where loyalty was as precarious as the finely crafted lion hides themselves. And yet, amid this climate of suspicion and danger, moments of brilliance emerged. The artisan's skill remained unmatched, and their creations reflected not just technical mastery but an understanding of the psychological and symbolic weight imbued in each garment. Every lion skin produced was a triumph over fear, a testament to resilience, and a silent victory for those who could navigate the treacherous intersection of craft and court politics. Cleopatra's court may have been a theater of betrayal, but within the walls of the factory, human ingenuity and courage persisted, leaving behind fragments of a story that would survive the ravages of centuries and inspire awe, curiosity, and a lingering sense of mystery. By the time the day ended, as shadows stretched across Alexandria and the Nile reflected the fading sunlight, the hidden factory stood as a testament to both human skill and the dangerous interplay of ambition and loyalty. Betrayal, rivalry, and political intrigue were inseparable from the creation of power itself, and the lion-skin garments were more than symbols, they were catalysts, instruments, and witnesses to a world where every choice mattered. And as the night settled over the city, one question persisted like a whisper across centuries: who within the factory had betrayed, who had survived, and which secrets had been carried forward, hidden in the seams of garments and the shadows of history, waiting to be uncovered by those daring enough to seek them. The underground factory pulsed with a rhythm all its own. Torches flickered across rough-hewn walls, casting shadows that seemed to twist like living things, while the heat from furnaces made the air thick with resin, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Nezra's hands were raw from weaving lion hides, yet she moved with precision born of years of secret apprenticeship. Every stitch told a story, every cut of leather a silent command. The factory wasn't just a place of labor, it was a hidden kingdom, operating on fear, loyalty, and devotion to a queen long gone. The workers, mostly nameless and faceless to history, had begun whispering about something more than garments. Strange symbols began appearing on scraps of fabric, markings they were told to keep secret. Some swore they resembled a crown, others a coiled serpent, the insignia of royalty. Nezra, who had grown up listening to the old tales of the pharaohs, recognized the imagery instantly. It wasn't just decoration, it was code. Someone was planning beyond what any living historian could predict, a vision that stretched far into the future, one that might place Cleopatra's bloodline, or at least her legacy, back on a throne, hidden from Rome and the centuries that followed. Horek, the hunter who had become a reluctant guardian, now spent more time inside the factory than outside. He watched over shipments of hides, ensuring no Roman soldiers or greedy merchants could intercept them. He had once been a man of the wild, following the sun across the Nile Delta, but now he was bound to stone walls, torchlight, and a growing unease that gnawed at his conscience. "We are weaving more than garments," he said one night to Nezra, his voice low and tight. "We are stitching secrets into history itself." The workers whispered among themselves, piecing together fragments of stolen knowledge, rumors of a surviving royal heir, and the possibility that the factory wasn't merely producing ceremonial attire but instruments of a covert resurrection of a dynasty. Each lion-skin cape, every ceremonial tunic, every gilded sash carried the weight of prophecy, secrecy, and danger. Nezra's own hands trembled as she realized the stakes. The threads weren't just silk and hair, they were symbols of power, hope, and rebellion. To make a single mistake could cost her life, or worse, expose the hidden heir to the Roman Empire. Aurelia Marcellus, far away in Alexandria, began connecting the dots in her meticulous investigation. Her position as a Roman tax officer gave her access to records few others could see. Hidden ledgers, shipment logs, and coded contracts hinted at something extraordinary, a textile operation invisible to Rome, yet producing more than anyone dared imagine. Aurelia could almost hear the clinking of needles and the whisper of workers as she traced these anomalies. Every ledger she examined hinted at a deliberate erasure, as though someone, centuries ago, had ensured that the factory's existence would remain a secret until rediscovered. The pieces began to form a mosaic too intricate to ignore. Inside the factory, Nezra and her fellow artisans began realizing that each item they produced had a role in something larger than themselves. The ceremonial garments weren't meant merely to honor a memory, they were weapons in a quiet war, symbols of a dynasty that might rise again. The workers had heard whispers that the heir, protected in the shadows, might one day wear these garments to claim a throne that Rome could never touch. They were not only crafting clothing, they were writing history with thread and leather. The realization spread tension through the workshop. Some workers quaked, terrified that such knowledge would draw the wrath of Rome. Others felt a surge of loyalty, a sense of purpose stronger than fear. Nezra herself felt caught in the center, her hands moved with a grace born of necessity, but her mind raced with questions. Could a kingdom be reborn from hidden threads and lion hides? Was it her duty to protect these secrets, even if it meant lying, stealing, or killing? And more frighteningly, was she being watched by enemies she could not see, some agent of Rome who already knew the factory's location? Then, one night, a small fire broke out in a storage chamber filled with resin-soaked hides. Panic erupted. Shouts bounced off stone walls, and the workers scrambled to extinguish the flames. It was no accident, they realized, someone had tried to sabotage them, someone who had learned too much. Nezra's heart pounded as she dove to rescue a bundle of half-finished garments. Among them, she found sketches and coded patterns hidden in the folds, precisely the same markings the archaeologists would uncover almost 2 millennia later. Her hands shook as she understood that these were more than instructions, they were a map, a blueprint for a lineage hidden in plain sight. The sabotage awakened a dangerous urgency. The inner circle, those loyalists sworn to protect Cleopatra's vision, convened in whispers and secret meetings beneath the roar of furnaces. Plans were drawn to smuggle the patterns to safer places, hidden deep within the desert or sealed within chambers designed never to be found. Each decision was a risk, each movement a gamble that could cost lives. And yet, as Nezra and Horek moved quietly among the shadows, the exhilaration of purpose surged. They were no longer just artisans or hunters, they were guardians of history, protectors of a secret that might outlast the empire itself. Word eventually reached Aurelia of the patterns being moved and coded messages circulating among the workers. The Roman tax officer felt both dread and awe. Whoever had orchestrated this factory, whoever had ensured the survival of these symbols, had planned with foresight and cunning that defied ordinary comprehension. She realized, with a chill running down her spine, that this was no mere operation of the past, it was an enduring conspiracy, a silent rebellion whose echoes would reach far into the future. By the end of the night, Nezra and the loyalists had hidden the patterns in a concealed chamber carved into the stone beneath the factory, sealing it carefully to resist the eyes of the world for generations. She pressed her hands against the cold stone, imagining the hands of future generations discovering these fabrics and writings, wondering who had created them, why, and for whom. The air in the chamber was heavy with dust and history, but also with the unspoken promise that Cleopatra's legacy would endure, even if Rome forgot, even if the world turned. The factory, for all its secrecy, had become a living entity. It breathed in shadows, whispered in silk, and waited. Nezra, exhausted but resolute, glanced at Horek. Their eyes met, sharing a silent understanding. What they were hiding could change everything, but the moment they stepped outside the protective walls, death, or worse, could claim them. The hum of the furnaces seemed to echo in the stone corridors, almost as if the building itself understood the gravity of what it contained. And as Nezra left the chamber for the night, dragging her weary feet over the cold, uneven stone, a single thought burned in her mind: one day, someone would find it all. Someone would unearth the patterns, the garments, the hidden maps of a dynasty erased from the scrolls. The factory might fall silent, the workers might vanish, and Rome might believe it had triumphed. Yet in the shadows, Cleopatra's vision endured. Somewhere in the world, the threads were waiting to speak again. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the hidden factory like a serpent coiling through the shadows, the acrid scent of burning resin and charred hides filling every corner. The air was thick and suffocating, yet it pulsed with urgency. The workers moved like ghosts among the furnaces, carrying bundles of precious lion-skin garments, glancing over their shoulders at every creak of timber or distant shout. Word had spread that Aurelia Marcellus, the Roman investigator whose reach had begun creeping closer to the truth, had discovered anomalies in Alexandria's trade records. The walls seemed to hum with warning: Rome was watching. Nezra's hands were slick with sweat as she worked furiously to finish the final ceremonial capes, each more intricate than the last. Every stitch seemed to carry the weight of history itself. Around her, artisans whispered prayers to long-forgotten gods, invoking protection for the heir of Cleopatra they barely dared acknowledge aloud. Even the youngest apprentice, only 12, worked with precision born of fear and loyalty, knowing that one mistake could doom them all. Outside, Horek crouched in the shadows of the supply tunnels, his eyes scanning for soldiers, for spies, for anyone who might threaten the fragile sanctuary of their clandestine labor. The first sign of attack was subtle: a clatter in the outer courtyard, muffled voices, the crunch of boots over gravel. A tension snapped like a taut string. Nezra felt her chest tighten, every heartbeat echoing in her ears. "They're here," Horek whispered, his hand resting on the hilt of a dagger. Panic rippled through the workers, and for a moment, time slowed. The roar of furnaces became a background drum to the rising fear. In that instant, centuries of secrecy, sacrifice, and devotion teetered on the brink of collapse. The Roman soldiers, under orders to suppress any trace of Cleopatra's lingering influence, had come armed and prepared for brutality. They stormed the factory through narrow tunnels and hidden stairways, their torches cutting through the smoky gloom like blades of light. Screams erupted, blending with the roar of lions whose hides were still curing nearby. Workers scrambled, clutching bundles of precious textiles to their chests, dragging the patterns, the codes, the secret garments toward hidden chambers. Nezra shoved aside a panicked apprentice, her own fingers bloody from the labor and dust, but her mind racing with strategy. Every corridor was a potential death trap, yet also a lifeline if navigated with care. Horek took a stand at the main staircase, blocking the path with a ferocity born of desperation. He swung his spear with precision, sending the first wave of soldiers staggering back. Blood ran in rivulets down his arm, but his eyes held a feral determination. "Go," he yelled, urging the workers deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, deeper into the stone-hidden sanctuaries they had constructed over years. He knew that every second bought could mean life or death for the patterns and garments, for the hope of preserving Cleopatra's vision. And yet, with every clash of steel, Horek understood that not all of them would survive the night. Amid the chaos, Nezra made her way to the inner chamber, where the final prototype, the lionskin cape, intricately stitched with gold threads and secret symbols, rested atop a pile of carefully hidden patterns. She pressed her hands against the cool stone walls, listening as soldiers' shouts grew closer, as footsteps echoed in the tunnels like the drumbeat of fate. Sweat and dust streaked her face, mixing with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. She lifted the garments, wrapping them carefully in a cloth that had been soaked in herbal preservatives, whispering a prayer to the gods she had not seen in years. "May they survive," she muttered under her breath, "even if we do not." In the outer tunnels, Horek fought with a desperation that bordered on madness. One by one, soldiers fell under his blows, but the numbers were overwhelming. The echo of clanging swords and the thud of bodies hitting stone filled the air. He knew he couldn't hold them forever, yet he refused to abandon the workers. His mind flickered to thoughts of his family, now long gone, and he realized that the choices he made in these moments would define the legacy of everyone hidden in the factory. He was not only protecting the past, he was protecting the possibility of a future written in secret threads and golden embroidery. As the soldiers breached the outer storage chambers, Nezra realized she had only moments left to act. She shoved the bundle of lionskin patterns and prototype garments into a concealed niche behind a false wall, pressing the stone tight until it clicked into place. Dust and smoke filled her lungs, her vision blurred, yet she could feel the weight of history settling onto her shoulders. Every inch of the chamber felt alive with anticipation, as though the very stones themselves were aware of the secret they now guarded. She whispered to Horek through the tunnel, "Go. Live. Tell no one." Horek's face twisted in grim determination. "I will buy you time," he said, sprinting toward the soldiers, drawing their attention. Metal clanged, sparks flew, and for a fleeting moment, the factory became a battleground worthy of legend. Horek's sacrifice was total. He drew every attacker into a narrow passage where the stones above had been weakened over time. As soldiers surged after him, the ceiling collapsed with a deafening roar, trapping him beneath tons of rock. Somewhere in the distance, Nezra felt the vibration of the collapse reverberate through her chest, a painful, horrifying reminder of the cost of their survival. The factory fell silent in the immediate aftermath, save for the hiss of cooling furnaces and the faint creaking of timber. Smoke lingered like a shroud over the chambers, and the survivors, a handful of artisans who had followed Nezra's instructions, crawled through secret exits, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding. They emerged into the desert night, carrying fragments of history that could not yet be shared. Each one knew that what they held was far more than textiles, it was a message, a hidden inheritance, a defiance of the empire that sought to erase them from memory. In the days that followed, the Romans scoured the area, discovering charred remains and assuming the factory was destroyed, that the rebellion had been quashed. But Nezra and her fellow survivors had ensured the continuity of Cleopatra's vision. The garments, patterns, and coded symbols had been hidden deep beneath stone, buried in silence. Only time could reveal their existence, centuries later, to a world unaware of the sacrifices made in those shadowed tunnels, where artisans, hunters, and loyalists had risked everything for the survival of a secret kingdom. As Nezra finally collapsed under the stars, the desert wind carrying sand across her weary face, she felt a strange serenity. Cleopatra's legacy, hidden from Rome and the world, had survived the night. And yet, in the quiet, she knew that the story was far from over. Somewhere beneath the stone, the lion-skin garments waited. Somewhere, Rome's authority could not reach. And somewhere, the echoes of their struggle would resonate for generations, carrying whispers of courage, sacrifice, and a queen whose influence refused to die. The desert wind swept across Alexandria, carrying with it the faint scent of the Mediterranean and the whisper of history. Beneath the city, hidden chambers had yielded fragments of lion-skin garments, coded patterns, and tools that testified to a secret enterprise nearly 2 millennia old. Dr. Layla Mansour and her team stood among the remnants, their eyes tracing every stitch, every glyph, every symbol carefully preserved by hands long gone. It was more than an archaeological discovery, it was a bridge across time, connecting the present to the lives of artisans, hunters, and loyalists who had dared to defy empires for the survival of a queen's vision. The story of Cleopatra, long mythologized and romanticized, was now enriched by a revelation no historian could have predicted. She had not merely ruled Egypt, she had orchestrated a hidden legacy, a secret that would endure beyond Rome's reach. The lion-skin garments, once symbols of divine authority and ritual power, were more than ceremonial, they were coded messages, testaments to ingenuity, and silent acts of rebellion. Each artifact spoke of individuals whose courage, loyalty, and skill had preserved her influence, even when the world sought to erase it. The narrative of history, once linear and unquestioned, now revealed layers of depth and defiance. Nezra's story emerged from the shadows, her journey emblematic of resilience and sacrifice. She had labored under immense pressure, her hands crafting garments and symbols that would endure centuries beyond her life. She had survived the fire, the collapse, and the encroaching forces of Rome, carrying patterns and garments in secret. Her courage was matched only by her skill, for without the precision of her hands, the legacy of the lion-skin garments might have been lost forever. Every stitch she made was infused with purpose, every fold of leather a silent act of rebellion, and every hidden pattern a testament to foresight and determination. In the quiet, one could almost hear her whispering through time, urging the modern world to understand the depth of her sacrifices. Horek, too, had become a figure frozen in memory. The hunter who had once tracked lions across the Nile Delta had sacrificed himself so that Nezra and the hidden heirs of Cleopatra's vision might survive. His courage was not recorded in Roman scrolls, it was a story preserved only in the artifacts themselves and in the echoes of history that modern archaeologists were beginning to hear. His death was not in vain, it had bought time, preserved secrets, and ensured that the artisan's work could endure. Horek's bravery became part of a larger narrative, one that transcended time, geography, and the empire that had sought to erase him. Aurelia Marcellus, the Roman investigator, had been equally pivotal. Her careful discretion, her willingness to record the truth in a coded scroll, and her choice to protect the artisans rather than expose them had ensured that the secret would survive. Though her name vanished from official records, her actions rippled across centuries, influencing the preservation of Cleopatra's hidden enterprise. Aurelia's story reminded modern observers that heroism is often quiet, that courage may not always seek recognition, and that sometimes, the most significant legacies are those deliberately hidden from history. As the modern team pieced together the fragments, they realized that Cleopatra's vision had been preserved not by kings or empires, but by ordinary people who understood the importance of secrecy, foresight, and sacrifice. Artisans, hunters, and loyalists had created a network of trust and devotion, a hidden continuity that allowed a queen's ambition to survive the collapse of her dynasty. Their labor had transcended personal survival, it was a deliberate act of historical preservation, ensuring that centuries later, the world might glimpse the full scope of Cleopatra's ingenuity and ambition. The chamber beneath Alexandria was not merely a repository of artifacts, it was a monument to human resilience. Each fragment told a story of courage under duress, of creativity in the face of oppression, and of loyalty that defied the passage of time. The lion-skin garments, with their intricate stitching and coded symbols, were more than items of clothing, they were carriers of memory, vessels of intent, and tangible proof that history can be deliberately shaped and preserved by those who understand its fragility. In examining them, the modern world confronted the realization that the past is never as simple as it appears. It is layered with complexity, secretive in its unfolding, and often held together by the quiet courage of the invisible. Each artifact, each inscription, each fragment of material culture seemed to speak in whispers, carrying messages that had been carefully concealed for centuries. Dr. Mansour paused, feeling the weight of what she had uncovered, not merely objects in a chamber, but lives suspended in time, stories of resilience and ingenuity that had survived despite deliberate efforts to erase them. These were people who had labored in silence, whose names might never appear in the grand chronicles of empires, yet whose influence had shaped history in ways that were profound and enduring. She thought of Nezra, whose work had been overshadowed by the monumental task of survival, yet whose contributions had been nothing short of transformative, of Horek, whose personal sacrifices had remained invisible, but without whose courage key moments in history might have been lost, and of Aurelia, whose discretion, patience, and meticulous care had preserved the narrative, safeguarding it for centuries against both decay and discovery. In that moment, archaeology transcended mere science, it became a dialogue across centuries, a recognition of the subtle, unrecorded acts of human courage that had quietly guided the course of history. The final lesson embedded in the chamber was both haunting and profoundly inspiring. History is rarely complete, rarely neat or conclusive. It is written and rewritten, erased and remembered, preserved in fragments that often speak louder than the official record. Empires rise and crumble, borders shift, dynasties fall, yet the impact of a few determined individuals can echo across millennia, shaping the world in ways that the grand narratives often overlook. The lion-skin garments, the coded patterns etched into textiles, and the sealed chambers themselves were more than relics, they were testimonies to the perseverance of human will, a reminder that uncovering the past demands patience, insight, and profound respect. They invited modern observers to acknowledge the hidden contributions of countless individuals whose labor, courage, and intelligence had quietly sustained civilizations, preserving what would have otherwise vanished into oblivion. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, stretching shadows across the excavation site, Dr. Mansour reflected on the tapestry of stories she had helped reconstruct. Cleopatra's ambition, she realized, had survived not only because of conquests or political prowess but because of the invisible hands that had preserved it, the unheralded acts of loyalty and ingenuity. The artisans, with their painstaking craft, had sewn history into the very fabric of civilization, the hunters, with their vigilance and bravery, had defended it, the loyalists, through secrecy and strategy, had safeguarded it across generations. And now, nearly 2,000 years later, the world was beginning to grasp the scope of their legacy. The chamber, sealed and untouched for centuries, stood as a silent monument to resilience, secrecy, and the enduring power of human will. Its contents were not simply objects of antiquity, they were voices of the past, echoing with courage, sacrifice, and the quiet defiance of those who had refused to be forgotten. As the wind swept through Alexandria that evening, scattering fine grains of sand across the modern excavation site, there was a palpable sense that the story had not yet reached its conclusion. The sealed chambers, the lion-skin garments, the coded inscriptions, they all waited patiently, offering themselves only to those willing to listen, to interpret, and to see beyond the surface of recorded history. Cleopatra's vision, it became clear, had endured not because of the might of her reign alone, but because ordinary individuals had dared to act extraordinarily. They had preserved secrets and narratives, knowing that one day, their courage would allow the hidden threads of ambition, loyalty, and sacrifice to emerge. The lesson was both simple and profound: history is never written solely by the victors. It is shaped by those who endure, who preserve, and who understand that survival itself is a form of rebellion. Somewhere beneath the shifting sands, in the shadows of forgotten chambers, the lion-skin garments remained, silent but alive, patiently guarding their secrets. When uncovered, They would reveal the full extent of Cleopatra's hidden empire, not just the queen herself, but the artisans who stitched her story, the hunters who defended it, the loyalists who protected it, and all those whose courage allowed history to whisper its truths across centuries. Dr. Mansour felt a shiver of reverence as she traced the contours of the artifacts with her eyes, imagining the hands that had touched them centuries before. Each thread, each mark, each seal was a testament to persistence and foresight, a recognition that some stories are so precious they must be hidden until the world is ready to understand them. The chamber's silence was not emptiness, it was a deliberate, careful preservation of knowledge, a silent dialogue with those who had come before and those who would come after. And as she stood there, the sun now fully setting, the wind carrying whispers of a city that had seen empires rise and fall, Dr. Mansour realized that history was less about what was visible and more about what endured, often in shadows, waiting to illuminate the human spirit. Every artifact, every garment, every coded message was a fragment of a larger narrative, one that spoke of ambition intertwined with secrecy, courage intertwined with discretion, and loyalty intertwined with survival. These hidden stories reminded her, in the deepest sense, that the true essence of history is not merely recorded events, but the lives of those who made choices that shaped the course of time in ways often invisible yet indelibly impactful. The chamber, once silent, had now begun to speak, and the world was listening, finally, with the reverence and curiosity it deserved. History, she understood, was a mosaic of the seen and the unseen, and it was the unseen that often bore the heaviest weight of legacy.